The drizzle fell like a veil over Dry Hollow, Wyoming, turning the dirt streets into rivers of mud and washing the color from an already gray afternoon. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the general store, its wheels groaning under the weight of travel and weather. From her window seat, Nora Whitmore watched the town materialize through the rain-streaked glass, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the endless prairie, looking more like an afterthought than a destination. She had imagined it differently during those 4 months of correspondence. Franklin Coates's letters had painted a picture of a thriving frontier town, his new tailoring shop at its heart, and herself as the skilled seamstress who would help it flourish. Now, stepping down from the coach with only a worn canvas bag in her hand, she wondered if hope had colored her judgment more than his words had colored the truth. The driver barely glanced at her as he tossed down her single trunk from the roof. It landed with a splash in a puddle, and she moved quickly to retrieve it before the water could seep through. No one had come to meet her. The platform, if 3 planks of warped wood could be called that, stood empty, save for an old dog sheltering beneath the store's overhang. Nora straightened her traveling dress, a practical gray wool that had served her well through 3 days of bone-jarring travel. At 5 feet 9 inches, she stood eye to eye with the driver, who seemed unsettled by this fact and hurried to tend his horses without the customary farewell. She was used to it, the quick looks away, the subtle step backward, the way men seemed to shrink when they realized they had to look up to meet her gaze. The main street stretched before her like a muddy scar. She could see the entire town from where she stood, the saloon with its false front trying to appear grander than its modest frame. A small church with a tilting steeple, what looked like a boarding house, and various shops in varying states of repair. No sign announced Coates Tailoring, though Franklin had written extensively about the prime location he'd secured. She picked up her trunk, grateful for the strength in her arms that years of cutting heavy fabric and hauling bolts of cloth had given her. The bag in her other hand held her most precious possessions, her grandmother's scissors, a set of steel needles from Philadelphia, and the paper pattern for a wedding dress she'd never had occasion to make. The general store's proprietor, a thin man with suspicious eyes, barely looked up when she entered. "I'm looking for Franklin Coates's establishment," she said, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Coates," the man squinted at her, taking in her height, her direct gaze, the way she stood without apology for the space she occupied. "Got himself a room above the barber shop, 2 doors down. Wouldn't call it an establishment." "Exactly." The walk to the barber shop felt longer than it was. Each step squelched in the mud, and she felt the eyes of the town upon her faces appearing in windows, conversations pausing as she passed. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough. A woman of her stature, arriving with purpose, was something else entirely. The narrow stairs beside the barber shop creaked under her weight and trunk. At the top, a single door bore a small card, F. Coates, Fine Tailoring. The lettering was already fading. She knocked once, twice. The door opened to reveal a man nothing like the confident entrepreneur of the letters. Franklin Coates was small, barely reaching her shoulder, with thinning hair and the kind of nervous energy that made him seem to vibrate in place. His eyes traveled up to meet hers, and she saw the exact moment his expression shifted from anticipation to dismay. "Miss Whitmore." His voice cracked slightly on her name. "Mr. Coates." She set down her trunk, extending her hand in greeting. He looked at it as if it might bite before offering a limp shake. "I have arrived as agreed. Shall we discuss the arrangements?" He stepped aside reluctantly, allowing her into what could charitably be called a workshop. A single cutting table dominated the cramped space, with shelves of fabric mostly poor quality. She noted lining one wall. A curtained corner presumably led to living quarters. The single window was grimy, filtering the gray afternoon into something even more dismal. "Yes, well." Franklin moved to put the cutting table between them. "About those arrangements, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Nora remained still. though she felt the floor shifting beneath her feet like the deck of a ship. A misunderstanding. "You're not. That is, I expected." He gestured vaguely at her person. "Someone more suitable. I've been sewing since I was 7 years old. Mr. Coates. I've worked in shops from Chicago to St. Louis. My references, which you've already seen, are impeccable." "It's not your skill I question." He couldn't seem to look at her directly, his gaze fixing somewhere around her collar. "It's your presence. A tailoring shop needs a certain respectability, someone who won't cause talk." "And I would cause talk." Her voice remained level, though heat was building behind her breastbone. "Look at you," the words burst from him. "You're taller than half the men in town. You look them in the eye like you're their equal. I need a seamstress who'll keep her head down, who won't draw attention, who'll make the wives comfortable and the husbands, well, the husbands not uncomfortable." The silence stretched between them like a badly sewn seam. Outside, she could hear the rain intensifying, drumming on the roof with increasing fervor. "I see," she said finally. "And my 4 months of correspondence, my journey of over 1,000 miles. Franklin moved to a small strongbox on a shelf, counting out bills with shaking fingers. "Here's half the deposit I sent, as promised in case of incompatibility. You can catch the morning stage back east. There's a boarding house down the street, Mrs. Gables. She'll have a room for tonight." He held out the money, still not meeting her eyes. Nora looked at the bills enough to get her partway back to nowhere in particular. Not enough to start over. Not enough to return to the life she'd left behind when she'd sold everything to make this journey. "I sew well," she said quietly. "I arrived when I said I would. What else have I done wrong?" "It's not what you've done." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "It's what you are. This is a small town. Miss Whitmore. People talk. And a woman like you. You're too remarkable." "I'm sorry." She took the money, her fingers steady though her chest felt tight. There was nothing more to say. She picked up her trunk and bag, moving toward the door with the same straight-back grace that had apparently condemned her. "Wait until morning to leave," Franklin called after her. "The roads aren't safe at night." She didn't reply. The rain had become a downpour by the time she reached the street. She stood for a moment, letting it wash over her, not caring that her good dress was soaking through. The boarding house sign swung in the wind, but the thought of facing another proprietor's assessment, another quick calculation of her worth based on her height and bearing, made her feet refuse to move in that direction. Instead, she found herself walking toward the edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the prairie began its endless roll toward mountains she couldn't see. An old warehouse stood empty, its loading dock providing a roof of sorts. She set her trunk beneath it and sank onto a wooden bench someone had abandoned there, probably waiting for firewood that never came. The sun was setting somewhere behind the clouds, turning the gray world into deeper shades of shadow. The saloon's tinny piano started up, mixing with rough laughter and the clink of glasses. The church bell tolled once for the hour, then fell silent, between these sounds of life carrying on without her. Nora sat with her hands folded in her lap and wondered how hope could weigh so much when it left you. She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that tears changed nothing, especially for a woman who already took up too much space in the world. Instead, she sat straight-backed on the hard bench, watching the rain fall, and tried not to think about tomorrow or the day after, or all the days that would follow this one small death of possibility. The sound of boots on wood made her look up, but that would come later. For now, there was just Nora Whitmore, sitting alone in the gathering dark of Dry Hollow, Wyoming, her first night already not mattering in exactly the way she'd feared it might. The morning came gray and reluctant, seeping through the cracks in the warehouse walls like spilled ink. Nora had dozed fitfully on the bench, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, waking every hour to shift positions and ease the ache in her back. When the first roosters began their territorial declarations, She stood, brushed the dust from her skirts, and prepared to face whatever came next. She couldn't leave on the morning stage, not with only half her deposit and nowhere particular to go. The thought of returning east felt like admitting a defeat too large to swallow. So she straightened her spine, picked up her belongings, and walked back toward the center of town with the same measured stride that had apparently marked her as unsuitable. The boarding house sat on a corner lot, painted white some years ago, but now showing the gray bones beneath. A sign in the window promised clean rooms, fair rates. Nora climbed the front steps and knocked. "Mrs." Gable answered quickly, as if she'd been waiting. She was a small, round woman with sharp eyes and flour dusting her apron. Those eyes took in Nora's travel-stained dress, the trunk at her feet, and the particular weariness that comes from spending a night outdoors. "You'd be the seamstress Franklin sent away," she said, not unkindly. It wasn't a question. "Word travels fast," Nora replied. "Faster than rain in this town." "Mrs." Gable stepped aside. "Come in. You look like you could use coffee and something hot to eat." The boarding house kitchen was warm and smelled of baking bread. Nora sat at the scrubbed wooden table while Mrs. Gable poured coffee black as prairie soil and set out a plate of biscuits and gravy. "Eat," she commanded. "Then we'll talk about a room." Nora ate slowly, savoring the first hot meal in days. Through the kitchen window, she could see the town waking up, shopkeepers sweeping their porches, a few early riders heading out toward the cattle ranges, women beginning their daily battle against the endless dust. "I can pay for a few nights," Nora said when her plate was clean. After that, you'll figure something out. Women like us always do." Mrs. Gable refilled her cup. "Franklin Coates is a fool, but he's not wrong about one thing this town does talk. They'll talk about you whether you stay or go. So you might as well do what suits you." Before Nora could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Franklin himself appeared, hat in hand, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Miss Whitmore, I thought you'd have taken the morning stage." "With half a deposit and no destination," Nora kept her voice neutral. "That seemed inadvisable." He shifted from foot to foot. "Yes, well, about that, I've been thinking." "Have you now?" Mrs. Gable's tone could have curdled milk. Franklin ignored her, focusing on a spot just past Nora's shoulder. "I may have been hasty. Perhaps we could work out an arrangement, a trial period." "Go on," Nora said. "You could work in the back room, taking in mending, alterations. Nothing that would require you to, that is, you wouldn't need to interact with customers directly. I'd handle all the measuring, the consultations. You'd be invisible, essentially." The kitchen went very quiet. Even the coffee pot seemed to stop its gentle bubbling. "Invisible," Nora repeated. "It's practical." Franklin rushed on. "You'd have work, I'd have help, everyone would be comfortable." "Everyone except Miss Whitmore." "Mrs." Gable interjected. Franklin's face reddened. "I'm trying to be reasonable here. A woman in business has to make certain accommodations. Surely you understand that." Nora stood slowly, unfolding to her full height. Franklin took an involuntary step backward. "I need a seamstress who won't cause talk," she said, echoing his words from the night before. "Someone who'll keep her head down, who won't draw attention." "Exactly." He seemed relieved she understood. "Someone invisible. It's for the best." "For who's best, Mr. Coates?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "This is the offer. Take it or leave it." "I'll leave it." The words came out firm and final. "I didn't travel 1,000 miles to become a ghost in someone else's shop." Franklin's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on something close to purple. "Then you're a fool. You'll find no other work in this town. No respectable work. Anyway, get out of my kitchen," Mrs. Gable said pleasantly, "before I take my rolling pin to your thick skull." He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the dishes. "Well, Mrs.," Gable said after a moment. "That's that, then." Nora sank back into her chair, the brief flare of defiance fading into the reality of her situation. No work, little money, and 1,000 miles from anything familiar. "I know that look, Mrs.," Gable said. "Saw it in my own mirror when Mr. Gable died and left me with this place and more debts than boards in the floor." "You're calculating how far you can stretch what you have." "Not very far. Further than you think, if you're smart about it. Room and board for a week, paid in advance. That gives you time to figure out your next move." "And if I don't figure it out?" "Then we'll figure out something else." "Mrs." Gable began clearing the dishes with brisk efficiency. "Despite what Franklin Coates thinks, this town needs more than invisible women. Now, let me show you to your room." The room was small but clean, tucked under the eaves on the 3rd floor. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand, a single chair by the window that looked out over the back gardens and toward the endless prairie beyond. "It's perfect," Nora said, meaning it. "It's yours for a week. After that, we'll see." "Mrs." Gable paused at the door. "A word of advice. Don't hide up here, walk the town. Let them get used to seeing you. Franklin's wrong about you being remarkable. There's nothing remarkable about a woman who knows her own worth. But this town's not used to it. And what people aren't used to, they fear. Make yourself familiar, and the fear fades." "Or it grows," Nora said. "Or it grows," Mrs. Gable agreed. "But hiding guarantees nothing changes." After she left, Nora unpacked slowly, hanging her few dresses on the pegs by the door, placing her grandmother's scissors and precious needles in the top drawer of the small dresser. The wedding dress pattern she left in her bag, some dreams were better kept folded away. The day stretched ahead, empty of purpose. She could stay in this room, venture out only for meals, make herself as invisible as Franklin wanted. Or she could take Mrs. Gable's advice and walk the town with her head up, claiming her right to exist in this space regardless of anyone's comfort. She chose to walk. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets muddy but passable. She made her way slowly down Main Street, nodding politely to those she passed, ignoring the whispers that followed in her wake. At the general store, she purchased thread and a small piece of muslin her funds wouldn't stretch to more, but she needed to keep her hands busy. "You're the seamstress," the proprietor said, the same thin man from yesterday. It wasn't a question. "I am." He considered her for a long moment. "My wife tears her skirts something terrible, always catching them on something. Franklin charges too much for simple mending." "I see," Nora said carefully. "Might be she'd have some work, if you were interested. Nothing fancy, just mending." "I might be interested," Nora allowed. "If the price was fair." He named a price low, but not insulting. She considered, then nodded. "Have her bring the skirts to Mrs. Gable's. I'll see what can be done." It wasn't much, but it was a start. She left the store with her small purchases and a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. At the end of Main Street, where the town gave way to the wild, she paused. The prairie stretched endlessly, grass rippling like water in the wind. Somewhere out there, cattle were grazing, cowboys were working. Life was continuing in its ancient rhythms. And here she stood, too tall, too direct, too much herself to fit into Franklin Coates's narrow vision of propriety. "I'm not invisible," she said to the wind, "and I won't pretend to be." The wind took her words and scattered them across the grass, and Nora walked back to the boarding house with her head high, already planning how to make a week's reprieve stretch into something more. The sun had long since surrendered to the horizon when Nora found herself back at the warehouse. Drawn by some instinct she couldn't name, she'd spent the afternoon mending Mrs. Patterson's skirts. The general store proprietor's wife had brought 3, each torn in exactly the way her husband had described. The work was simple, the pay modest, but it was something. Now, with evening settling over Dry Hollow like a familiar blanket, she sat on the same bench where she'd spent her first night. This time, though, she'd come by choice rather than necessity, seeking the quiet that existed at the town's edge where civilization gave way to wilderness. She'd brought the muslin and thread, working by feel more than sight to practice a decorative stitch her grandmother had taught her years ago. The repetitive motion soothed her, each small loop and pull a meditation against the uncertainty that still pressed at her chest. The sound of boots on gravel made her hands pause. She looked up to see a man approaching, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy gait of someone comfortable with long distances. As he drew closer, the dying light caught his face, weathered but not old, with gray eyes that seemed to hold the colors of storm clouds. "Pardon me," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. His voice was low, roughened by wind and work. "I didn't expect to find anyone here." "Nor I to be found," Nora replied, surprised by her own honesty. He gestured to the bench. "Mind if I sit? Been in the saddle since dawn, and these old bones are complaining." She shifted slightly, making room. He settled onto the far end of the bench with a quiet groan, removing his hat to run a hand through dark hair touched with early silver at the temples. "Calder Row," he offered after a moment. "Nora Whitmore." "The seamstress?" It wasn't a question, and there was no judgment in his tone, just acknowledgement. "Word does travel fast here, like wildfire in dry grass." He leaned back, stretching his legs out before him. "Though folks tend to embellish as they pass things along. By tomorrow, you'll probably have arrived with a dozen trunks and demanded Franklin build you a shop of gold." Despite herself, Nora felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Just the one trunk, I'm afraid, and I'd have settled for common decency rather than gold." "That's often harder to come by than gold in these parts." They sat in companionable silence, watching the first stars pierce through the deepening sky. Nora found herself stealing glances at him the way he held himself still but ready, like a man accustomed to watching horizons. His clothes were worn but well mended, his boots resoled more than once. "You work the cattle?" she asked eventually. "Manage a spread east of town, the double our crew of 12 men, when they're not off drinking their wages or chasing fool's errands." He paused. "You always seek out abandoned warehouses in the evening." "Only when I need to think." "And do you need to think?" She considered the question, her needle moving again through the fabric. "I need to figure out how to make a life in a place that's already decided it doesn't want me." "Has it the whole place?" "Franklin Coates seems to speak for everyone." Franklin Coates couldn't speak for a church mouse if it paid him. Calder shifted, turning slightly to face her. "He came here 2 years ago with grand plans and a rich uncle's money. Built that shop of his on credit and promises. Most folks tolerate him because they have to, not because they want to. Yet they'll listen when he says I'm too remarkable to employ. Some will, others will make up their own minds, given time. Time I may not have." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, you could have taken his offer, worked in the back room, invisible." "Is that what you would have done?" "I'm not a woman trying to make her way in a world that prefers its women small and quiet." He looked at her directly for the first time, those gray eyes steady. "But no, I wouldn't have taken it either." The honesty in his voice made something ease in her chest. She'd been holding herself so rigid all day, braced against the town's stares and whispers. Here, in the growing dark, with this quiet stranger, she felt some of that tension drain away. "I should go," she said when full darkness had settled around them. "Mrs. Gable will wonder." "I'll walk you back. These streets aren't always friendly after dark." She wanted to protest that she could take care of herself, but something in his manner stopped her. This wasn't about her capability. It was simply what decent people did for each other. They walked in comfortable quiet, their footsteps echoing off the wooden boardwalks. At the boarding house gate, He stopped. "If you're looking for work," he said carefully. "We go through a lot of shirts and pants at the ranch. Cowboys are hard on their clothes, and none of us can sew worth a damn. It wouldn't be fancy work, but it would be steady. You don't know my work. I could be terrible. You mended your own cuff there." He nodded toward her sleeve. "Tiny stitches. Even in this light, barely visible. Someone who takes that much care with their own worn clothes won't slack on others." She looked down, surprised he'd noticed. She'd mended the small tear that morning, taking extra care to make the repair invisible, a habit born of having few clothes and needing them to last. "Think about it," he said before she could respond. "I'll be in town day after tomorrow with the wagon. If you're interested, I'll have work for you." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You don't know me. Why offer this?" He settled his hat back on his head, considering. "Maybe because I know what it's like to not fit where you're supposed to. Maybe because the double R could use decent mending. Or maybe because anyone who'd rather sit alone on a hard bench than compromise who they are deserves a chance to prove the town wrong." He touched his hat brim in farewell and walked away, leaving Nora standing at the gate with possibilities she hadn't expected spinning through her mind. Inside, Mrs. Gable was knitting by the fire, looking up with knowing eyes as Nora entered. "That was Calder Rowe," she said. Not really a question. "Yes. Good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair as they come. Lost his wife 5 years back to fever. Some say he came here to forget, but I think he came here to remember without everyone watching him do it." Nora thought of those steady gray eyes, the way he'd offered work without making it feel like charity or expecting gratitude. "He offered me mending work from the ranch. And, I don't know, taking work from a man I don't know, going out to a ranch with cowboys, is exactly what plenty of women do to survive out here." "Mrs. Gable finished. "The question isn't whether it's proper. Nothing about surviving in the territories is proper by Eastern standards. The question is whether you trust him to treat you fair." "I just met him. Sometimes that's all it takes to know." Mrs. Gable's needles clicked steadily. "I knew Mr. Gable was honest the moment I met him. Took me 10 years to find out he was also a terrible businessman, but he was honest till the day he died." Nora climbed the stairs to her room, her mind turning over the evening's conversation. At her window, she could see the stars spreading across the prairie sky like spilled salt. Somewhere out there was the Double R Ranch, with its crew of hard-working men and their clothes in need of mending. It wasn't what she'd planned when she'd answered Franklin's advertisement. But then, nothing about Dry Hollow was what she'd planned. She lit her lamp and pulled out paper and pen from her trunk. If she was going to take the work, she'd need to make a list of supplies, prices, reasonable expectations, plan it properly, professionally, show that she might be too tall, too direct, too much herself for Franklin Coates. But she was exactly right for the work that needed doing. As she wrote, she thought about Calder Rowe's words. "Anyone who'd rather sit alone on a hard bench than compromise who they are deserves a chance." Maybe that's what this was, not the opportunity she'd expected, but the chance she needed. Tomorrow, she'd walk the town again, head high, and let them whisper. Let them see her as remarkable or strange or whatever they needed to see. The day after that, she'd be ready with her answer when the wagon came to town. The morning light filtered through thin curtains, painting golden stripes across the small room's wooden floor. Nora woke to the sound of activity below. Mrs. Gable preparing breakfast, boarders moving about, the ordinary rhythm of a day beginning. For the first time since arriving in Dry Hollow, she felt something close to settled. The previous day had been productive. After accepting Calder's offer, she'd spent hours at the general store selecting supplies, negotiating prices with Mr. Patterson, who seemed impressed by her knowledge of fabric and thread quality. Word of her arrangement with the Double R Ranch had already begun to circulate, and while some faces showed disapproval, others held curiosity. Now, sitting at Mrs. Gable's breakfast table with the other boarders, a traveling salesman, and 2 miners passing through, she listened to the morning's gossip while planning her work schedule. The double R wagon would arrive this afternoon with the first batch of mending. "Heard you're taking work from Calder Row," the salesman said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Brave woman." "Brave," Nora kept her tone neutral. "Ranch work's rough, those cowboys—" He trailed off suggestively. "Need their clothes mended, I imagine," she finished calmly. "Unless cowboys in Wyoming have discovered some magical way to avoid tears and worn seams." "Mrs. Gable hid a smile behind her coffee cup while the miners chuckled. Still, the salesman persisted. "A woman alone, dealing with all those men—" Mr. Rowe struck me as respectful and professional," Nora said. "I expect his employees follow his example." "Calder runs a tight outfit," one of the miners confirmed. "No nonsense tolerated. Man's fair but firm. You'll have no trouble from his crew." The conversation shifted to other topics: the price of silver, the weather forecast, rumors of the railroad extending further west. Nora excused herself to prepare her workspace, converting a corner of her small room into a sewing station. She arranged her tools precisely: scissors, needles of various sizes, thread organized by color and weight, the small oil lamp for close work. By noon, she'd completed Mrs. Patterson's latest batch of mending and 2 shirts for the miners, who paid promptly and promised to spread word of her skill. She was pressing the finished pieces when Mrs. Gable called up the stairs. "Your wagon's here." Nora descended to find a buckboard loaded with canvas bags outside. Calder stood beside it, speaking quietly with a younger man who held the reins. Both turned as she approached. "Miss Whitmore." Calder touched his hat. "This is Tom Santos, one of my hands. He'll be handling the weekly runs to town." Tom, barely out of his teens with sun-darkened skin and shy eyes, nodded respectfully. "Ma'am." "Let's see what you've brought," Nora said, moving to examine the bags. They contained what she'd expected: shirts torn by barbed wire and hard work, trousers worn through at the knees, a few vests with broken buttons, but everything was clean. She noted with approval. Someone had made sure the clothes were washed before sending them. "I insisted on that," Calder said, reading her expression. "No reason you should have to deal with trail dirt on top of the mending." "I appreciate that." She did quick mental calculations. "This will take me about a week, working steady. What's your timeline?" "Week's fine. Tom comes to town every Saturday for supplies anyway." He pulled out a leather pouch. "Payment for the first batch, plus extra for supplies. We'll settle up the difference when you return the mended pieces." The pouch was heavier than expected. She looked up to find him watching her steadily. "That seems like too much for work not yet done." "Call it an investment in having clothes that don't fall apart," he said. "Besides, I know what it's like to count every penny in a new place. This way you can buy what you need without worrying." Before she could protest further, a commotion erupted down the street. A woman's voice, shrill with indignation, cut through the afternoon air. They turned to see Franklin Coates and his wife, a small, pinched woman Nora had seen but not met, approaching rapidly. "This is completely inappropriate," Mrs. Coates announced before she'd even reached them. "A single woman conducting business in the street with men, handling their unmentionables." Tom's ears turned red. Calder's expression didn't change, but Nora caught the tightening around his jaw. "I'm conducting business, Mrs. Coates," Nora said evenly, "taking in mending, as many women do. Not from ranches full of rough men, not standing in the public street like a businesswoman," Nora suggested quietly. Franklin finally found his voice. "What my wife means is that there are proper channels for such arrangements. Perhaps if you worked through my shop." "The shop that wouldn't employ me?" Nora let a hint of steel enter her voice. "How interesting that I'm too remarkable to hire but perfectly acceptable to subcontract through—" We're trying to help you maintain some respectability. Franklin blustered. By taking a percentage of work you'd have no hand in, Calder spoke for the first time. His quiet tone somehow more damning than shouting would have been. That's generous of you, Coates. This doesn't concern you, Rowe. It does when you're harassing the woman I've hired to do honest work. He stepped slightly forward, not threatening but clearly establishing his position. Miss Whitmore and I have a business arrangement. If that offends your delicate sensibilities, I suggest you look elsewhere. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the raised voices. Nora saw faces she recognized: Mr. Patterson from the general store, the blacksmith, several women who'd been cool to her before. This was it, she realized. This moment would define her place in Dry Hollow, one way or another. She straightened to her full height, looking down at Mrs. Coates with calm directness. I appreciate your concern for my reputation, she said, loud enough for all to hear. But I've found that honest work honestly done creates its own respectability. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have mending to begin. She picked up one of the canvas bags, testing its weight. Tom quickly grabbed two others while Calder took the rest. Mrs. Coates sputtered, but Franklin pulled her away, perhaps sensing the crowd's mood shifting. Thank you, Nora said quietly once they'd deposited the bags in Mrs. Gable's front room. No thanks needed, Calder replied, though you handled that well enough on your own. Still, it helps to have support. You'll have it when needed, though I suspect you'll need it less than folks think. He paused at the door. One more thing, Sunday dinner at the ranch. If you're inclined. The boys like to meet whoever's handling their clothes. Makes them more careful with them, knowing there's a real person doing the fixing. All of them at once. They don't bite Miss Whitmore, well, except for Cookie, but we keep him in the kitchen. Despite the tension of the past few minutes, she felt her lips twitch toward a smile. I'll consider it. Tom can fetch you after church if you decide to come. He touched his hat brim again and left, Tom trailing behind with a mumbled farewell. Mrs. Gable emerged from wherever she'd been diplomatically waiting out the confrontation. Well, that was more excitement than we usually see on a Tuesday. I'm sorry if I've brought trouble to your door. Trouble, Mrs. Gable laughed. Child, that was the most entertainment this town's had in months. Franklin Coates getting put in his place, his wife scandalized, and Calder Rowe defending a lady's honor. They'll be talking about this for weeks. That's what worries me. Let them talk. While they're flapping their gums, you'll be earning honest money and proving them wrong. She helped move the bags upstairs. Besides, did you see Martha Hendricks in that crowd? She runs the hotel laundry. Bet you'll have her asking about taking overflow work before the week's out. As Nora sorted through the ranch clothes that evening, cataloging repairs needed and matching threads to fabric, she thought about the afternoon's confrontation. She'd stood her ground, claimed her right to work, to exist on her own terms. It felt like a small victory, but victory nonetheless. Her window looked out toward the east, where somewhere beyond the darkening prairie, the Double R Ranch sprawled under the vast sky. Sunday dinner with a dozen cowboys. The thought should have been daunting, but instead, she found herself curious. What kind of men chose this hard life? What stories did they carry along with their torn clothes? She held up a shirt, examining a peculiar tear that looked like it had been made by horns rather than wire. Each piece would tell her something about its owner, careful or careless, proud or practical. By the time she returned them, she'd know the ranch hands by their mending, even if she'd never met them. It was a different kind of introduction to a community, but perhaps that suited her. Let others judge by height and manner. She'd judge by how a man treated his possessions and whether he said thank you for careful repairs. The lamp burned late as she worked, her needle moving in steady, precise rhythms, outside. Dry Hollow settled into sleep, but in her small room above the town's judgment. Nora Whitmore stitched herself a place in the world, one careful repair at a time. Sunday arrived crisp and bright, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Nora had attended the morning service, sitting in a back pew and ignoring the whispers that followed her like shadows. Reverend Mills had preached about the dignity of honest labor, which felt pointed enough that several heads turned her way. She'd kept her eyes forward, hands folded, giving them nothing more to discuss. Now, dressed in her best day dress, a deep green that brought out the auburn in her hair, she waited on Mrs. Gable's porch for Tom Santos and the promised wagon. She'd packed the first batch of completed mending in a clean flour sack, each piece pressed and folded with care. "Nervous, Mrs.?" Gable asked, joining her with a cup of tea. "Should I be?" "Ranch full of men who haven't seen a woman besides Cookie in weeks, maybe a little." But her eyes twinkled with mischief rather than warning. "Though Calder keeps good order, you'll be fine." The wagon appeared right on time, Tom handling the reins with easy competence. He'd cleaned up for town, his hair slicked back and shirt properly buttoned. He jumped down to help her up, then carefully stowed the mending sack. "The boys are excited to meet you," he said as they headed east out of town. "Been cleaning all morning. You'd think the president was coming to dinner. I hope they won't be disappointed by the reality." "Ma'am, you fixed Jake's favorite shirt so good he can't find where the tear was. Far as he's concerned, you walk on water." The road to the Double R wound through gradually changing landscape, from the flat near town to rolling hills dotted with juniper and sage. Tom proved a pleasant companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of ranch life that had her alternately laughing and shaking her head at the cowboy's antics. "There," he said finally, pointing ahead. "Home sweet home." The Double R sprawled across a natural bowl in the hills, sheltered but not hidden. The main house sat solid and unpretentious, built to last rather than impress. Barns, corrals, and a bunkhouse formed a rough square around a dusty yard where chickens pecked and a dog dozed in the sun. As they pulled up, men began emerging from various buildings, trying to look casual and failing entirely. Nora counted 9, ranging from Tom's age to a grizzled fellow who must have been 60. All wore their cleanest clothes, faces scrubbed and hair combed. Calder appeared from the house, and Nora felt something ease in her chest. He looked the same as always, calm, steady, a fixed point in uncertain territory. "Miss Whitmore, welcome to the Double R." He helped her down from the wagon, his hand warm and calloused. "Let me introduce you to the crew." The introductions blurred together at first: Jake, Will, Eduardo, Samuel, others, but she made herself focus on each face, each name. These men were trusting her with their clothes, their comfort. The least she could do was remember who they were. "And that's Cookie," Calder finished, gesturing to a massive man with arms like hams and surprisingly gentle eyes. "He runs the kitchen with an iron fist and a wooden spoon." "Pleased to meet you, miss." Cookie rumbled. "Hope you brought your appetite. Been cooking since dawn." "It smells wonderful," Nora said honestly. The scent of roasting meat and fresh bread made her stomach remind her she'd been too nervous to eat much breakfast. "This way," Calder said, guiding her toward the house. "We eat in the main dining room on Sundays." The dining room was simple but clean, a long table already set with mismatched plates and bent silverware. The men filed in with a minimum of jostling, each clearly knowing their place. Calder seated her to his right, with Tom on her other side. "We say grace on Sundays," Calder explained. "Eduardo usually does the honors." Eduardo, a compact man with silver threading through dark hair, offered a prayer in melodious Spanish, then English. The amens had barely faded before Cookie began bringing in platters: roast beef, potatoes, carrots, beans, biscuits light as clouds, gravy rich enough to stand a spoon in. Conversation started stilted, the men clearly unsure how to act with a lady present. But as the food disappeared and Nora asked questions about their work, The atmosphere relaxed. Soon they were telling stories over each other, debating the merits of different horse breeds, complaining good-naturedly about Cookie's coffee. Strong enough to float a horseshoe. Jake claimed, "Keeps you awake on night watch." Cookie retorted, "Which is more than I can say for you most times." Nora found herself genuinely enjoying the meal. These men were rough-edged but genuine, their teasing carrying the warmth of family rather than malice. They included her naturally in their conversation, seeming to forget their earlier nervousness. "Miss Whitmore fixed this shirt," Will announced proudly, showing off the repair she'd made to a vicious tear. "Can't even tell where it was." "Mine, too," Samuel added, "though I don't know how she made sense of it. Looked like I'd fought a wildcat and lost." "What did happen to it?" Nora asked. Samuel flushed. "Got caught trying to pull a calf out of a ravine. Mama Cow didn't appreciate the help. Threw him clean over a boulder," Jake added helpfully. "Shirt caught on everything between here and next Tuesday." "But you saved the calf," Nora prompted. "Course he did," Tom said. "Samuel can't leave any creature in trouble. Found him nursing 3 orphan kittens in the barn last month." Now it was Samuel's turn to color deeply, while the others ribbed him about his soft heart. Nora caught Calder watching her with something like approval in those gray eyes. After dinner, Cookie produced a pie that had the men groaning about their full stomachs, even as they reached for plates. Nora insisted on helping clear despite protests, carrying dishes to the kitchen where Cookie had already begun washing. "You don't need to do that, miss," he said. "I've been sitting while you've been working. It's only fair." She picked up a dish towel and began drying. "Besides, this gives me a chance to compliment the cook properly. That was the best meal I've had in months." Cookie's weathered face creased in a pleased smile. "You're welcome at our table any time, Miss. The boys like you." "How can you tell?" "They're being themselves instead of putting on airs. That's rare with a lady present." Through the kitchen window, she could see some of the men in the yard. Tom showing off rope tricks while others laughed and called suggestions. It was a peaceful scene, far removed from the tensions of town. "Cookie," she said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, miss." "Why did Mr. Rowe really offer me this work? He doesn't know me, doesn't owe me anything." Cookie considered while scrubbing a pot. "Calder's got his own code. Sees someone getting a raw deal. He steps in, quiet-like, usually, but he steps in." He glanced at her. "Plus, we do need the mending. I'm tired of patching patches." After the dishes were done, Calder found her on the porch, watching the sun slant low across the hills. "The boys are planning to show you around if you're interested. Tom's particularly proud of the horses." "I'd like that." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for this, for giving me a chance when you didn't have to." "Everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves," he said simply. "You're proving yourself just fine." They stood quietly for a moment, the evening air cool and sage-scented. Then the cowboys descended, eager to show off their domain. She spent the next hour touring barns and corrals, learning about ranch operations, admiring horses with names like Buttermilk and Thunder. When Tom finally drove her back to town, the mending sack refilled with new work. She carried with her more than just torn clothes. She had names to put to the tears now, stories to think about while she sewed. Jake's shirt, caught on wire while fixing fence. Eduardo's vest, scorched from getting too close to a branding fire. Will's trousers, split while breaking a green horse. "Same time next week?" Tom asked as he helped her down at Mrs. Gable's. "Same time," she confirmed. Inside, Mrs. Gable was waiting with tea and barely contained curiosity. "Well, how was your afternoon with the wild cowboys?" "Educational," Nora said, then smiled at her landlady's expression. "And enjoyable. They're good men." "Rough around the edges, though." "Perhaps, but honest about it. I prefer that to smooth edges that hide sharp dealing." Mrs. Gable nodded approvingly. You'll do well here, Nora Whitmore. Mark my words." That night, as Nora worked on the new batch of mending, she thought about the afternoon's easy camaraderie. She'd expected awkwardness, possibly hostility. Instead, she'd found acceptance based on nothing more than good work and genuine interest in their lives. Her needle paused over Eduardo's vest. Considering the scorched fabric, she could simply patch it, but perhaps a bit of decorative stitching around the repair would strengthen it while adding something special. These men worked hard, lived simply. Their clothes could reflect that dignity. Outside her window, Dry Hollow slept, but she felt more awake than she had in months. She had work, real work. She had colleagues of sorts in the Cowboys. And in Calder Row, she had... What an employer. Certainly, perhaps a friend. The thought warmed her as much as the lamp's glow. Whatever else Dry Hollow might offer or deny her. She'd found something unexpected at the Double R, a place where being remarkable was less important than being reliable, where the work mattered more than the worker's height or manner. She bent back to her sewing, humming softly, stitching connections as much as cloth. The church social was in full swing when Nora arrived. The small building transformed with paper lanterns and wildflower bouquets. She'd debated attending, knowing her presence would draw attention, but Mrs. Gable had insisted. "Hide away and they'll make up stories worse than the truth," she'd said, practically pushing Nora out the door. "Show your face and give them something real to talk about." So here she stood in her deep blue dress, one she'd sewn herself with fabric bought using her earnings from the Double R. The bodice fitted perfectly, the skirt falling in graceful lines that emphasized rather than disguised her height. If she was going to be noticed anyway, she might as well look her best. The church hall buzzed with conversation that dipped noticeably when she entered. She kept her chin level, moving toward the refreshment table where Mrs. Patterson was serving punch. "That's a lovely dress," the older woman said, her tone warmer than it had been weeks ago. "Your own work?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." "My skirts have never looked better since you mended them. That decorative stitching you added to hide the repair, very clever." Before Nora could respond, music struck up from the corner where Tom Santos and two other young men had assembled with a fiddle, guitar, and harmonica. Couples began forming for a dance, and Nora stepped back, intending to find a quiet corner to observe. "Miss Whitmore." She turned to find Calder behind her, dressed in what must be his Sunday best, a dark jacket over a clean white shirt, his boots polished to a shine. He looked different away from the ranch, more formal but no less solid. "Mr. Rowe, I didn't expect to see you here." "I make an appearance now and then. Keeps the town from thinking I've gone completely feral." His gray eyes held a hint of humor. "Would you care to dance?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm rather tall for most partners." "Good thing I'm not most partners. Then..." She looked at him, really looked. He was right, standing this close. She realized he had perhaps 2 inches on her. No more. It would work, if she wanted it to. "All right," she said, placing her hand in his. They moved onto the floor as a waltz began, and Nora discovered that Calder Rowe danced like he did everything else competently, without fuss, with a quiet confidence that made following easy. He didn't hold her at the stiff arm's length some men insisted on, nor did he pull her inappropriately close. It was simply comfortable, natural, like they'd done this before. "People are staring," she murmured as they turned. "Let them. Give them something prettier than usual to look at." The compliment, delivered in his matter-of-fact way, warmed her more than flowery phrases might have. They danced in companionable silence, and Nora found herself relaxing into the music, into the movement, into this unexpected moment of belonging. When the song ended, other dancers had joined them on the floor. Jake from the ranch was attempting to teach a giggling young woman something that might have been a polka, while Eduardo gracefully led Mrs. Mills through the steps. "Another?" Calder asked. "I should probably..." Please. The single word carried weight. I don't often get to dance with someone who matches my stride. So they danced again, and again after that. By the fourth song, Nora had stopped noticing the stares, caught up in the simple pleasure of movement and music. Other men began approaching between songs. Mr. Patterson's nephew, the banker's son. Even shy Tom Santos worked up the courage to ask. She danced with them all, but found herself looking forward to Calder's steady presence when he reclaimed her for every third dance. You've caused quite a stir, he observed during a break in the music. They stood by the open windows, cooling air a relief after the exertion. By dancing, how scandalous. By being yourself. He handed her a cup of punch. That troubles some people more than any scandal would. Does it trouble you? He considered the question with his usual deliberation. No, I find it refreshing. Too many people here trying to be what they think others want. You just are what you are. A too-tall seamstress with no talent for invisibility. A skilled woman who stands straight and looks people in the eye. He paused. Though I'd argue you're not too anything. You're exactly as tall as you're meant to be. Before she could respond, Franklin Coates materialized beside them like a bad penny, his wife in tow. Mr. Rowe, he said with false heartiness, monopolizing our guest. Miss Whitmore is hardly a guest. Calder replied evenly. She's a member of the community, has been for weeks now. Still, perhaps others would like a chance to, that is. Franklin seemed to lose his thread under Calder's steady gaze. Were you planning to ask me to dance, Mr. Coates? Nora inquired innocently. Franklin's face flushed. The height difference between them was even more pronounced up close. She had at least 6 inches on him. No, that wasn't. Then perhaps you shouldn't concern yourself with my dance partners. Mrs. Coates tugged at her husband's arm, clearly wanting to escape. But Franklin, perhaps emboldened by punch or wounded pride, persisted. I'm simply looking out for your reputation, Miss Whitmore. Dancing so frequently with one man, particularly one who employs you. People might get the wrong idea. The music had stopped, and Nora became aware of the widening circle of silence around them. This felt like a moment balanced on a knife's edge. The only wrong idea I see, she said clearly, is the notion that honest employment and innocent dancing require anyone's permission or approval. Mr. Rowe has shown me nothing but professional courtesy and personal kindness. If that troubles you, perhaps you should examine why. Well said. A new voice interjected. Reverend Mills joined their group, his presence immediately diffusing the tension. I believe the Bible has several things to say about bearing false witness and gossiping. Mr. Coates, perhaps we could discuss them after services tomorrow. Franklin mumbled something and retreated, pulling his wife along. The Reverend winked at Nora before moving on to greet other parishioners. That was well handled. Calder said quietly, I'm tired of handling things well. Nora admitted, sometimes I just want to exist without having to justify it. I know the feeling. She looked at him curiously, remembering Mrs. Gable's comment about him coming here to remember without being watched. Why do you think I live on a ranch instead of in town? He gestured around the crowded hall. Too many eyes, too many opinions. Out there. The cattle don't care if you're meeting their expectations. The music started again, a slower tune this time. Without asking, he held out his hand. She took it, and they moved back onto the floor. This dance felt different. The awareness that had been building all evening crystallized into something Nora couldn't quite name. The way his hand rested warm and sure at her waist. The subtle scent of leather and soap when they turned. The quiet strength in how he led without dominating it all combined to create a bubble of intimacy in the crowded room. Thank you, she said softly, for standing up for me. Again. You don't need anyone to stand up for you. You do fine on your own. He guided her through a turn. But everyone can use someone standing beside them now and then. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Nora felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with the dancing. When the evening finally wound down, Calder walked her back to Mrs. Gable's, their steps matching naturally in the moonlit streets. "Next Sunday?" he asked at the gate. "The boys have been asking when you're coming back." "Just the boys." In the silver light, she caught what might have been a smile. Maybe not just them. He waited until she was safely inside before heading back toward the livery where he'd stabbed his horse. Nora watched from her window as his figure disappeared into the darkness, her mind replaying the evening's dances, conversations, and that one weighted moment of understanding. "Good evening, Mrs." Gable asked from her doorway, clearly having waited up. "Complicated," Nora replied. "But yes, good." "The best evenings usually are both." The older woman smiled knowingly. "Sleep well, dear." But sleep came slowly. Nora lay in her narrow bed, feeling the ghost of Calder's hand at her waist, hearing the echo of his quiet words about standing beside someone. She'd come to Dry Hollow looking for work, for a fresh start, for a place to build a quiet life. She hadn't expected to find someone who saw her not as too tall or too direct or too anything, but as exactly right. The thought thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. Outside, a night bird called, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. The sounds of the prairie, wild and free, and utterly themselves. Maybe that's what Calder had meant. Stop trying to be small enough for others' comfort. Be yourself. Wholly and unapologetically. She smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow there would be more mending, more whispers, more small battles to fight. But tonight she had danced with a man who matched her stride, and that was enough. More than enough. It was a beginning. The news came on a Tuesday morning, carried by Tom Santos, who'd ridden hard from the ranch. His usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by tight worry as he burst into Mrs. Gable's kitchen where Nora was finishing breakfast. "It's Mr. Rowe," he said without preamble. "There's been an accident." Nora's cup clattered against its saucer. "What happened?" "Yesterday evening, bringing the horses through Rattler Pass. Storm came up sudden like, made the rocks slick. His mount lost footing." Tom's hands twisted his hat brim. "He went down hard. Doc's with him now, but—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "How bad, Mrs.?" Gable asked, her arm coming around Nora's shoulders. "Broken ribs for certain. Maybe worse. Lost a lot of blood from a gash on his head. He was conscious when we got him back to the house, but Doc says the next few days are critical." Nora stood, her mind already racing. "What does he need?" "Doc's doing all he can, but—" Tom looked uncomfortable. "Thing is, Cookie's good for rough doctoring, but he's got hands like bear paws. Doc said someone with gentler touch should tend the wounds. Keep them clean. Watch for fever." "I'll come," Nora said immediately. "Miss, I wasn't asking." "I know, but I'm offering—" She was already moving toward the stairs. "Give me 10 minutes to pack some things." "Nora," Mrs. Gable called after her. "Are you sure people will talk if you go out there to nurse him?" Nora paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Let them. He stood beside me when I needed it. I won't do less for him." The ride to the ranch passed in a blur. Tom filled her in on what details he knew how Calder had been leading the remuda through the narrow pass when lightning spooked the horses, how he'd managed to get most of them through before his own mount slipped, how Jake and Eduardo had climbed down the treacherous rocks to reach him. "He kept trying to give orders even while we were carrying him up," Tom said. A weak attempt at lightness. "Said we better not have lost any horses on account of him." The ranch was subdued when they arrived, the usual bustle replaced by quiet purpose. Cookie met them at the door, relief plain on his weathered face. "Thank the Lord you're here. Miss, I've been afraid to change the bandages for fear of making things worse." He led her to Calder's room, a space she'd never entered before, It was simply furnished but clean, with windows looking out toward the mountains. Calder lay still in the bed, his face pale above the quilts, a white bandage wrapped around his head. Doc Morrison, a thin man with gentle hands, looked up as she entered. "Miss Whitmore, good. I could use someone with steady nerves and steadier hands." He gestured to the supplies laid out on the bedside table. "The head wound needs regular cleaning, and the ribs are wrapped but will need checking. He's in and out of consciousness, that's normal with a head injury, but someone needs to watch for signs of fever or confusion." "I understand." The doctor showed her what to do, how to clean the wounds without causing more damage, what danger signs to watch for. Calder stirred once during the instruction, gray eyes focusing briefly on her face before sliding closed again. "I'll be back tomorrow," Doc Morrison said, gathering his things. "Send Tom for me immediately if he worsens. Otherwise, keep him still, keep him comfortable, and keep those wounds clean." After he left, Nora settled into the chair beside the bed, studying Calder's face in the afternoon light. Even injured, there was strength in the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, but also vulnerability she'd never seen before, the way his hand lay open on the quilt, the slight furrow between his brows that spoke of pain even in sleep. She worked quietly, cleaning the head wound with careful hands, checking the wrap around his ribs, adjusting the quilts when he shivered. The cowboys took turns looking in, bringing coffee, offering to spell her, but she waved them off. This was where she needed to be. Evening came, and with it, Calder's first real awakening. His eyes opened slowly, taking a moment to focus on her face. "Nora." His voice was rough, confused. "What are you doing here?" "Tending a stubborn rancher who thought he could wrestle a mountain and lost," she said gently. "How do you feel?" "Like the mountain won." He tried to shift and winced. "The horses, all safe. Tom said you got them through before your accident." "Good." His eyes drifted closed, then opened again with effort. "You shouldn't be here. People will talk." "People are already talking. At least now they'll have something interesting to say." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Practical as always." His hand moved restlessly on the quilt. "You should go home. Cookie has hands like ham hocks and the medical touch of a blacksmith." She caught his restless hand, stilling it with her own. "I'm staying until you're better. Don't waste energy arguing." He looked at their joined hands with something like wonder. "Bossy woman. Stubborn man." She squeezed gently before releasing him. "Now rest. Doctor's orders." The next days fell into a rhythm. Nora tended Calder's wounds, coaxed him to eat the broth Cookie prepared, read to him from the few books on his shelf when he was wakeful. The cowboys moved around her with careful respect, bringing what she needed, taking away what she didn't, creating a protective circle that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with loyalty. On the third day, Calder's fever spiked. He tossed restlessly, muttering words she couldn't catch, his skin burning under her touch. Doc Morrison came, prescribed willow bark tea and cold compresses, but admitted there was little to do but wait. Nora didn't leave his side. She bathed his face with cool water, forced tea between his lips, talked to him in a low, steady voice about anything and nothing the ranch gossip Cookie shared, the decorative stitching she planned for Eduardo's vest, the way the sunset looked through his window. "My wife loved sunsets," he said suddenly, his voice clear despite the fever. Nora started. She'd thought him unconscious. Said they were God's way of signing his paintings. "She sounds lovely," Nora said carefully. "She was small, delicate, everything proper and right." His gray eyes found hers, fever bright but lucid. "Nothing like you." The words might have stung, but his tone held no criticism, only observation. "No," she agreed. "I'm nothing like that." "That's not bad," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Margaret needed protecting from the world. You stand up to it. Stand tall and dare it to say something. His hand found hers again, grip stronger than it had been. I'm tired of delicate things that break, tired of being careful all the time. You're fevered, she said softly. You should rest. Am I fevered? He smiled, the expression transforming his face. Maybe, but I'm not wrong. You make me want to stand straight again instead of hunching over memories. The fever broke near dawn, leaving him weak but clear-eyed. Nora, exhausted from the night's vigil, dozed in her chair until a gentle touch on her hand woke her. You stayed, Calder said simply. I said I would. Even when I rambled about, things better left buried. You were ill. People say all sorts of things when fevered. He studied her face. Do they mean them less because of the fever, or more? She had no answer for that, so she busied herself checking his bandages, noting with relief that the wounds were healing clean. Doc Morrison will be pleased. You're mending well. Thanks to you. Thanks to your own stubbornness. More like, I just made sure you pointed it toward healing instead of horse wrestling. He chuckled, then winced as it pulled at his ribs. Fair point. By the end of the week, he was sitting up, restless with confinement but still too weak to do more than complain about it. Nora had fallen into easy domesticity at the ranch, helping Cookie with meals, organizing Calder's room, continuing her mending work in the evenings by his bedside. You should go back to town, he said one evening as she worked on Jake's shirt. You have other customers, other responsibilities. Mrs. Gable is forwarding any urgent work. The rest can wait. Nora. His use of her first name, deliberate and warm, made her look up. I'm grateful. More than I can say. But I won't be the reason you lose the life you're building in town. You're not making me do anything, she said firmly. I'm here because I choose to be, because you need help, and I can give it. It's that simple. Is it? His gray eyes held hers. Nothing about this feels simple to me. The words hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said, everything that had been building since that first night on the warehouse bench. Nora felt her heart race but kept her hands steady on her sewing. No, she admitted finally. It's not simple, but right things rarely are. A knock interrupted whatever he might have said. Tom peered around the door. Sorry to bother, but there's a wagon from town. Says it's urgent for Miss Whitmore. Nora found Mrs. Gable in the kitchen, her face creased with worry. I'm sorry to come out here, dear, but I thought you should know. Franklin Coates is stirring up trouble. Says you've abandoned your business to play nursemaid. That it's improper, that he's thinking of filing a complaint with the town council about moral turpitude. Let him, Nora said tiredly. What can they do? Make life difficult, refuse you business licenses, pressure others not to hire you. Mrs. Gable took her hands. I'm not saying leave. Lord knows that man needs you here, but you should know what you're facing when you come back. After Mrs. Gable left, Nora stood in the kitchen, staring out at the darkening prairie. She'd known there would be consequences for this choice, but knowing and facing were different things. Problems. Calder's voice from the doorway made her spin. He stood there, one hand braced against the frame, pale but upright. You shouldn't be up. Heard voices, got worried. He moved carefully to a chair. What's Coates up to now? She told him, watching his face darken with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'll talk to him, he said finally. Make it clear. No, she cut him off. This is my battle, my choice. I won't have you fighting it for me. Then we'll fight it together, he said simply. Like you said, everyone needs someone standing beside them. The echo of their dance conversation warmed her even as worry churned in her stomach. You're in no condition to fight anything except your own stubbornness about resting. I'm healing, thanks to you. He reached out, caught her hand. Whatever comes next, we'll face it. You don't have to stand alone anymore. Nora, not unless you want to. She looked at their joined hands. his calloused and scarred, hers bearing the tiny marks of countless needle pricks. Working hands, both of them, strong hands. "All right," she said softly. "Together, then." The night had settled thick and heavy over Dry Hollow by the time Nora returned to town. She'd stayed at the ranch until Calder could move about without wincing, until Doc Morrison declared him out of immediate danger. Now, walking up Mrs. Gable's front steps, she felt the weight of coming battles pressing on her shoulders. "You look tired, dear," Mrs. Gable said, meeting her at the door with a cup of tea already steaming. "How is he?" "Healing. Stubborn about it, but healing." Nora sank into a kitchen chair. "What's the mood in town?" "Mixed, as you'd expect. The Coates faction is making noise about propriety and scandal, but Martha Hendricks told them to stuff their propriety where the sun don't shine, her words, not mine. And several of the ranchers' wives have pointed out that tending the sick is Christian charity, not scandal. And the town council," Mrs. Gable's face darkened. "Meeting tomorrow night. Franklin's pushed for a formal hearing about your conduct unbecoming. Says you're a bad influence on the young ladies of the town." Nora almost laughed at the absurdity. "Because I can sew and tend wounds. Because you don't apologize for taking up space. That frightens small men more than any scandal would." The next morning, Nora dressed carefully in her most conservative dress, gray wool, high collar, every button properly fastened. If they wanted to paint her as improper, she wouldn't give them any ammunition. She spent the day working on the backlog of mending that had accumulated, her hands steady even as her mind churned. Several customers came by, some supportive, others clearly fishing for gossip about her time at the ranch. She gave them all the same calm responses, focusing on their clothing rather than their curiosity. Just before sunset, a knock interrupted her work. Tom Santos stood at the door, hat in hand. "Ma'am, Mr. Rowe sent me. He's coming to the meeting tonight." "He shouldn't be traveling yet." "Try telling him that. He's already in the wagon, and Jake's driving careful as a grandmother. Said to tell you he'll be there, no matter what fool thing you say about fighting your own battles." Despite her worry, Nora felt warmth bloom in her chest. Stubborn man, indeed. The town hall was packed when she arrived. It seemed half of Dry Hollow had turned out, curiosity and judgment mixing in the close air. Franklin Coates sat at the front with several other council members, looking pleased with himself. His wife perched beside him like a small, vindictive bird. Nora took a seat in the middle section, keeping her back straight and her expression neutral. Whispers followed her progress, but she'd grown used to that constant accompaniment. "We're here to discuss matters of public morality," Franklin began, standing with a self-important gravity. "Specifically, the concerning behavior of Miss Whitmore, who has shown repeatedly that she has no regard for the proper boundaries that should govern a woman's conduct." "Get to the point, Coates," growled Henry Patterson from the back. "Some of us have real work in the morning." Franklin flushed. "The point is that Miss Whitmore spent a week unchaperoned at the Rowe Ranch, allegedly nursing Mr. Rowe, but in reality conducting herself in a manner that saved my life." Every head turned as Calder entered, moving slowly but steadily down the center aisle. Jake hovered behind him, ready to catch him if needed, but Calder walked on his own power. He dressed formally for the occasion: black coat, clean white shirt, the kind of clothes that transformed him from rancher to gentleman. Mr. Rowe," Franklin sputtered. "You shouldn't be—" "I shouldn't be alive, according to Doc Morrison. Would have died of fever if not for Miss Whitmore's care." Calder reached the front, turning to face the assembled crowd. "Every person in this room knows the character of a place is shown by how it treats those who need help. Miss Whitmore saw a neighbor in need and acted with Christian charity. If that's improper, then we need to re-examine what proper means." "She spent nights at your ranch, Mrs." Coates shrilled, "unchaperoned among all those men." Those men, Calder said coolly, showed her nothing but respect and gratitude. Cookie slept outside my door to ensure propriety. Jake and Eduardo took turns sitting up in case she needed anything. My ranch hands showed more honor and decency than this council is showing tonight. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nora saw nods from some quarters, skeptical looks from others. Furthermore, Calder continued, his voice gaining strength, Miss Whitmore has conducted herself with nothing but professionalism since arriving in Dry Hollow. She's provided quality work at fair prices, helped anyone who asked, and asked for nothing but the chance to make an honest living. The only impropriety I see is trying to run her out of town for being too tall and too talented for certain people's comfort. Now see here, Franklin began. I'm not finished. Calder's tone could have frozen water. You rejected her for employment because she didn't fit your narrow idea of what a woman should be, when she succeeded anyway. You've tried to tear her down. That's not protecting morality, that's petty jealousy dressed up in righteous clothes. Reverend Mills stood from his seat near the front. If I may address the council. The council members nodded reluctantly. I've watched Miss Whitmore these past months. The Reverend said, she attends services faithfully, conducts her business honestly, and showed true Christian charity intending to Mr. Rowe. If we condemn her for that, we condemn the very values we claim to uphold. Here, here, Martha Hendricks called out. I've got more mending for her whenever she's ready. Best work in the territory. Others began speaking up, ranchers whose wives appreciated the quality of her work. Townswomen who'd noticed how she helped elderly misses. Chen with her shopping. Even Tom Santos shyly mentioning how she'd taught him to sew on a button properly. Nora sat stunned as person after person stood to speak for her. She'd thought herself alone in this fight, but apparently, while she'd been focusing on surviving, she'd been building a community without realizing it. This is all very touching, Franklin said when the testimonials finally died down. But the fact remains that standards must be maintained. What standards? Calder interrupted. The standard that says a woman must make herself small to be acceptable, that she must hide her skills to protect fragile egos, that she must choose between being respected and being herself. He turned to look directly at Nora for the first time since entering. Miss Whitmore, would you stand, please? Confused but trusting. She rose. At her full height, she towered over most of the seated crowd, her gray dress severe but dignified. This woman, Calder said, his eyes never leaving hers, is remarkable. Not because she's tall, though she carries that height with grace. Not because she's skilled, though her work speaks for itself. She's remarkable because she faces each day with courage, treats everyone with dignity, and refuses to apologize for existing. If that threatens you, the problem isn't with her. The room had gone completely silent. Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her chin up, meeting Calder's intense gaze. I move to dismiss this entire proceeding. Henry Patterson called out, All in favor. A chorus of ayes filled the room, drowning out Franklin's protests. The other council members, reading the room's mood, quickly agreed to table the matter indefinitely. As people began filing out, many stopped to speak to Nora brief words of support, promises of future work, even a few apologies from those who'd been cool to her before. She accepted them all graciously, though her attention kept drifting to where Calder leaned against the wall, Jake hovering nearby with clear concern. When the crowd finally thinned, she made her way to him. You shouldn't have come. You're still too weak. I'm exactly where I needed to be, he said firmly, though I might take that seat now. Jake quickly provided a chair, and Calder sank into it with poorly hidden relief. The burst of energy that had carried him through his speech was clearly fading. That was quite a performance, Nora said softly. Not a performance. Every word was true. He looked up at her. Did you mean what you said about standing together? Yes. Even after this circus, even knowing Franklin won't stop trying to make trouble. Especially then. She smiled. Though next time you decide to defend my honor, Maybe do it without the dramatic entrance. My heart can't take the worry. Your heart. His eyes sharpened with interest. She felt herself blush. You know what I mean. I'm not sure I do. Maybe you should explain. Slowly, using small words. I did just have a head injury. Despite everything, she laughed. Impossible man. A remarkable woman. His hand found hers. I meant that too. Every word. Jake cleared his throat. Not to interrupt, but we should get you back before you fall over and undo all Miss Nora's hard work. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Calder dozing against Jake's shoulder while Nora followed in Tom's wagon. The stars spread above them like scattered diamonds. And she thought about community, about belonging, about standing tall both literally and figuratively. At the ranch, she helped Calder back to his room, checking his wounds one more time before preparing to leave. Stay, he said quietly. Not for nursing, just stay. Cookie will make up the spare room, all proper. I sleep better knowing you're near. It was improper. It would give Franklin more ammunition. It flew in the face of everything a respectable woman should do. All right, she said simply. Just tonight. But as she settled into the spare room, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, she knew she was lying to herself. This was more than one night. This was the beginning of something that no town council or narrow-minded shopkeeper could stop. Something remarkable, built between two people who'd learned that standing tall was easier when you had someone standing beside you. The town meeting about the proposed railway had been called for a Thursday evening in late October. The harvest was in. The cattle drives completed. And folks had time to think about the future. Nora arrived early, taking a seat where she could see the whole room. She'd learned to read the town's moods in her months here, and tonight the air crackled with division. The railway company had sent a representative, a smooth-talking man named Jeremiah Woolcott, whose pressed suit and oiled mustache marked him as decidedly not local. He stood at the front with maps and charts, painting a picture of prosperity that would follow the iron rails. Progress, ladies and gentlemen, he proclaimed. The railway will bring commerce, growth, connections to the wider world. Dry Hollow could become a hub of civilization rather than a dusty way station. Many heads nodded, particularly among the merchants. Franklin Coates sat in the front row, practically glowing with anticipation of future profits. But Nora noticed the ranchers looked less convinced, especially when Woolcott spread out his proposed route map. The most efficient path requires cutting through the northern forest. Woolcott continued smoothly. Timber rights would be purchased, of course, at fair market value. Fair by whose measure? The voice came from the back, and Nora turned to see Calder entering. He'd recovered well from his injuries, though he still moved with careful deliberation. The crowd parted to let him through. Mr. Rowe, I run the Double R Ranch, and that forest you're so eager to clear provides water for half the ranches in this valley. You cut those trees. You affect the watershed. Progress requires sacrifice. Woolcott replied dismissively. I'm sure alternative water sources can be found. Spoken like a man who's never had to dig a well in drought season. Someone called out. Calder reached the front, his presence commanding attention despite or perhaps because of his quiet demeanor. Show me the environmental survey. I beg your pardon. The survey of water tables, wildlife migration, soil impact. Surely your company completed one before proposing to clear-cut a forest that's been here longer than this country's been a nation. Woolcott's mustache twitched. These are minor considerations. To you, maybe, not to those of us who make our living from this land. Calder turned to address the room. I'm not against progress. The railway could benefit us all, but not at the cost of destroying what sustains us. This is why we need practical men making decisions. Franklin interjected, standing with pompous authority. Not every tree hugger and bleeding heart who... I've lost more money to drought than you've ever made. Coates. Henry Patterson interrupted. If Roe says the watershed matters, I'm listening. The room erupted in arguments, merchants versus ranchers, those who wanted growth against those who valued preservation. Through it all, Wolcott stood with increasing irritation, clearly used to easier conquests. Then Nora stood. The arguments didn't stop immediately, but they dimmed as people noticed her rising to her full height. She'd learned to use her presence strategically, and now she employed it fully. Mr. Wolcott, she said, her voice carrying clearly. You speak of progress and civilization. Tell me, what makes a place civilized? He blinked at the unexpected question. Well, commerce, culture, connections. Respect, she interrupted calmly. Respect for the land that feeds us. Respect for the people who work it. Respect for the future we're building, not just the profits we're chasing. She moved forward, each step deliberate. I came here as an outsider, like you, but unlike you. I listened. I learned. These people aren't obstacles to your progress. They're the reason any progress matters. Madam, I hardly think... That's precisely the problem. She stood before him now, looking down at his pomaded head. You hardly think about anything beyond your company's ledgers. But we live here. We'll be here long after you've moved on to the next town, the next forest to level, the next community to divide. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Even some who'd supported the railway looked thoughtful. Furthermore, Nora continued, turning to address the room. Why must we accept his terms wholesale if the railway wants to come through Dry Hollow? Let them work with us, not over us. Alternative routes that preserve the forest, investment in local infrastructure, guarantees about water rights. We have leverage. They need this route to connect to the southern lines. Use it. The woman makes sense, Judge Talbot said from his seat near the front. Perhaps we should form a committee to negotiate properly. I volunteer, Calder said immediately. As do I, added Patterson. And I, Martha Hendricks called out, causing some surprised looks. What do you think women don't understand business? Who do you think manages the books while you men play with your cattle? Even Reverend Mills raised his hand. The church has an interest in preserving our community's character. Wolcott's face had progressed from red to purple. This is highly irregular. So is trying to railroad a town into accepting your terms without discussion, Judge Talbot said dryly. I move to table this vote until our committee can meet with your superiors. All in favor? The ayes were overwhelming. Franklin Coates looked like he'd swallowed a lemon, while Wolcott gathered his materials with sharp, angry movements. You're making a mistake, he warned. The railway doesn't need Dry Hollow. We can easily route around you, leave you to wither while other towns prosper. Then do it, Nora said simply. If our choice is between withering slowly with our principles intact, or rotting quickly with gold in our pockets, I know which I'd choose. Here, here, several voices called out. As the meeting broke up, Nora found herself surrounded by townspeople wanting to shake her hand, thank her for speaking up, praise her clear thinking. It was overwhelming and wonderful and slightly terrifying. Quite a speech, Calder said when he finally reached her side. You've got a gift for cutting to the heart of things. I just said what needed saying. That's the gift. Most people can't see what needs saying, or they see it but lack the courage to voice it. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. You've come a long way from that woman sitting alone on a warehouse bench. Have I? Sometimes I feel like I'm still her, just with better seating. No, he said seriously. That woman was surviving. You're thriving. There's a world of difference. Franklin Coates pushed past them, his wife in tow. Don't think this changes anything, he hissed at Nora. You're still an outsider, still improper, still here, she finished calmly. And I will be tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days following. Get used to it, Mr. Coates. He stormed off, but his threats felt toothless now. The town had chosen, and they'd chosen to stand with her, with Calder, with their own interests over outside profit. "Walk with me," Calder asked as the hall emptied. They strolled slowly through the quiet streets, the October air crisp with coming winter. The stars seemed especially bright, as if celebrating the evening's victory. "Thank you," Calder said eventually, "for standing up there, for seeing what others missed. We stood together. That's what made the difference." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, his gray eyes seemed to hold depth she hadn't noticed before. "Is that what we do, stand together?" "I thought we'd established that." "I mean—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words for the first time since she'd known him. "I mean always. Not just against railways or gossiping townspeople, but always." Nora's heart began to race. "Calder, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I was fevered, I told you I was tired of being careful with delicate things, that I wanted someone who stood tall and faced the world." He took her hands in his. "I'm saying I found her, if she'll have me." "You're asking—" "I'm asking if you'd consider making this partnership permanent. I know it's not conventional. I know there'll be talk. But we've faced down worse than talk. Haven't we?" Nora looked at him this quiet, strong man who saw her height as an asset, her directness as a gift, her presence as something to celebrate rather than diminish, who stood beside her in every battle, large or small. "Franklin will have an apoplexy," she said. "Is that a yes?" "That's let's make sure he's invited to the wedding so he can see it happen." Calder laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cool air. Then, moving with careful deliberation, he drew her close and kissed her. It was gentle and sure and felt like coming home after a long journey. "I love you," he said simply when they parted. "All of you, every remarkable inch." "And I love you," she replied, "even when you're too stubborn to stay in bed when injured." "Especially then," he corrected, and kissed her again. They walked back to Mrs. Gable's hand in hand, already planning a winter wedding, perhaps. When the ranch work was slower, nothing fancy, neither of them cared for show. Just family the ranch hands counted. Cookie insisted, close friends, and a promise to keep standing together through whatever came. Mrs. Gable was waiting on the porch, a knowing smile on her face. "About time," she said simply. "I'll start planning the wedding dress, something that shows off that lovely height of yours." "Nothing too—" Nora began. "Remarkable, Mrs." Gable laughed. "My dear, everything about you is remarkable. Might as well dress the part." As Nora climbed the stairs to her room, soon to be vacated for a permanent place at the Double R, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From rejection and isolation to acceptance and love. From fighting alone to standing with others. Tomorrow there would be committee meetings about the railway. Mending to finish. Wedding plans to begin. Franklin Coates would undoubtedly cause more trouble, and Woolcott would be back with new strategies. But tonight, she was simply a woman who'd found her place in the world, and the man who wanted to share it with her. Outside her window, the prairie stretched endless under the stars, and Nora Whitmore, soon to be Nora Rowe, stood tall and unafraid, exactly as she was meant to be. The first snow had begun to fall as Nora made her way back to Mrs. Gable's boarding house one final time. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Calder Rowe in a simple ceremony at the church. But tonight, she wanted one last evening in the room that had been her sanctuary when she'd had nowhere else to go. She paused on the familiar porch, remembering that first desperate morning when Mrs. Gable had taken her in, fed her, given her hope when Franklin Coates had tried to steal it. Through the window, she could see the older woman knitting by the fire, and warmth bloomed in her chest. Family came in many forms out here in the territories. "Getting sentimental," Calder's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing at the gate, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. "Maybe a little. What are you doing here? Tradition says you shouldn't see me before the wedding." "Tradition says a lot of things we've already ignored." He climbed the steps to join her. "I couldn't let you spend this last night thinking about beginnings without being here for this ending." "It's not an ending," she protested. "No, but it's a closing of one chapter before we write the next." He pulled something from his coat pocket. "I have something for you." It was a small velvet box, worn at the edges. Inside lay a simple gold band with a single small pearl. "It was my grandmother's," he said quietly. "She was tall for her time, too. Stood eye to eye with my grandfather. Never apologized for it. I think she would have liked you." Nora touched the ring gently. "It's beautiful." She came west as a young bride, helped build the first iteration of the ranch, faced down claim jumpers, droughts, hard winters. But grandfather always said the bravest thing she ever did was stand up in a town meeting and tell the menfolk they were fools for refusing to build a school. He smiled at the memory. "Sound familiar?" "I just spoke common sense about the railway." "You stood tall and spoke truth. That's rarer than gold out here." He took the ring from the box, holding it up to catch the lamplight from the window. "This ring has seen strong women build lives in unlikely places. Seemed fitting it should see another." "Calder," her voice caught. "I know we said simple ceremony, exchange of rings tomorrow, but I wanted this moment to be just ours. No audience, no whispers, no Franklin Coates glowering from the back pew." He took her left hand in his. "Nora Whitmore, you came to this town looking for work and found a war. You could have bent, could have made yourself smaller, could have taken the easy path. Instead, you stood straight and showed us all what courage looks like. Will you stand with me, not just tomorrow, but for all the tomorrows after?" "Yes," she whispered. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if it had always belonged there. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet, while snow fell around them like nature's blessing. "I should go," he said eventually. "Cookie's threatened to tie me to a chair if I try to see you again before tomorrow afternoon." Cookie's a wise man. The wisest, he's made enough food to feed half of Wyoming. Says it's not every day a row man finds a woman who can match him stride for stride. After he left, Nora went inside to find Mrs. Gable beaming. "I saw that through the window. About had me in tears, and I'm not a crying woman." They sat together by the fire, sharing tea and memories of the past months. Tomorrow, the boarding house would have a new tenant, a schoolteacher from back east, coming to teach at the school the town had finally agreed to build after the railway negotiation showed the power of collective action. "Oh, you did that, you know," Mrs. Gable said. "The school, people saw you stand up, speak out, and it reminded them they had voices too. Martha Hendricks has organized a ladies' auxiliary that's already planning a library. Judge Talbot's talking about proper water rights legislation. Even some of Franklin's supporters are questioning why they let him speak for them." You just were yourself, completely and unapologetically. That's revolution enough in a place that wanted its women quiet and small." Mrs. Gable patted her hand. "This town needed shaking up. You were the earthquake we didn't know we were waiting for." The next morning dawned crystal clear, the snow having passed in the night, leaving the world white and sparkling. Nora dressed in the gown Mrs. Gable had insisted on making deep blue wool that brought out her eyes, cut to flatter her height rather than disguise it. Her hair was swept up, showing the graceful line of her neck, and her grandmother's scissors hung from her belt on a silver chain, a reminder of where she'd come from and the strength she carried. The church was full when she arrived. It seemed the whole town had turned out, even those who'd initially spurned her. The Double R Cowboys stood in a row, cleaned and pressed and beaming like proud brothers. Martha Hendricks and her ladies' auxiliary had decorated with pine boughs and winter berries. Even Franklin Coates had come, though he sat in the back with a face that suggested he'd been sucking lemons. But Nora had eyes only for Calder. standing at the altar in his best black suit, looking at her like she was the sunrise after a long night. Reverend Mills smiled warmly as she walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away because she was giving herself freely and gladly. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, "we gather today to witness something remarkable, not just the union of two people, but the proof that love finds a way to grow even in unlikely soil." The ceremony was simple, as they'd wanted. They spoke traditional vows, but the weight behind them felt anything but traditional. When Calder promised to honor and cherish her, she heard in it his promise to never ask her to be less than she was. When she promised to stand by him in sickness and health, they both remembered those dark days when she'd held him through fever and pain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Mills declared. "You may kiss your bride." Calder drew her close, whispering just before their lips met, "Hello, Mrs. Rowe." "Hello, Mr. Rowe," she whispered back. And then there was no more need for words. The reception at the ranch was everything Cookie had promised and more. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Eduardo played his guitar while couples danced, and even Judge Talbot was seen attempting what might charitably be called a waltz. As evening fell, Nora found herself on the porch where she'd first toured the ranch all those months ago. But now she stood here as mistress of the Double R partner in all ways to the man beside her. "No regrets?" Calder asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How could I regret the path that brought me here?" She leaned back against him, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate in the yard below. "That first night, sitting on that warehouse bench, I thought my life was over. I never imagined—" "What?" All of this, work that matters, people who accept me, a home that feels like home. You." She turned in his arms to face him. "Mostly you." "That first night," he said softly, "when I found you there, I told myself I was just being neighborly, but the truth was, I saw something in you that I'd been missing in myself. Strength to stand alone, but maybe wanting someone to stand with. And now we stand together." "Now and always." They kissed as snow began to fall again, gentle flakes that blessed their beginning. Inside, someone started calling for a toast, and they turned to go back to their guests. But Calder paused, looking at her with that steady gray gaze that still made her heart race. "You know what I whispered that first night when I sat down beside you?" She shook her head. In all the months since, she'd never asked, somehow knowing he'd tell her when ready. "I said, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and staying anyway." He touched her face gently. "You taught me I had it backwards. Courage is about being yourself even when the world wants you to be someone else. Thank you for showing me that." "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me when I was still learning to see myself." They walked back into the warmth and light together, to friends who cheered and a future that sprawled as wide and full of possibility as the prairie itself. Nora Rowe, who had once been too tall, too direct, too remarkable for a narrow-minded town's comfort, now stood exactly as tall as she was meant to, loved for precisely who she was. And in Dry Hollow, Wyoming, the whispers had changed from scandal to admiration. The woman who'd arrived alone on a rainy night had become the woman who showed them all that standing tall wasn't about height. It was about courage, integrity, and the willingness to be remarkable in a world that often preferred the ordinary. Her first night hadn't mattered to those who'd turned her away, but to the cowboy who'd sat beside her and whispered about courage. It had been the beginning of everything. And that, as they say in the territories, made all the difference. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Wild West. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about Nora and Calder's tale. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover this video and experience the magic of frontier romance. Until next time, partners.